Yeah, good evening, everybody. Good to be with you all today. So I wanted to, again, I've been tending to draw on topics that are top of mind for me, but those things tend to be perennial topics. And the reason that the things that are top of mind for one of us ends up often being perennial and impacting lots of other people is because humans are very basic in a sense. Every creature is very basic, right? We experience pain, we experience happiness, we have fears, we have joys. We struggle with our outer conditions. We try to make contributions. We try to get good things for ourselves and avoid problems. But the dynamics, whatever are the details of our life, the underlying dynamics are not that different for us. For us each as humans, and also for animals as well. It's a similar kind of dynamic. And if you observe pets or other animals, zookeepers or pet owners and so forth, you see these we would call them like human dynamics, but in a sense, it's not human. It's not that animals act in ways that are like humans. It's that humans act in ways that are like animals, because we're fundamentally, we have the same kind of we think about many of the things in a similar way. It's just humans have these amazing stories that go along with it all. So the storytelling primates, and so our stories can create all these layers of elaborations on top of the drama that we're all going through in our lives. So I wanted to talk about cultivating a good heart, or cultivating a kind heart, and taking that as a practice, as something that we can do intentionally, as something we can build, and some of the techniques for building that, and why that's so important to build that, build a good heart. So this topic sometimes can even be framed as non-hatred. It may sound a little bit strong to say non-hatred, but also the same as non-aversion. It means instead of having some attitude of aversion towards others, or fear or distance and so forth, we cultivate a kind heart. So the opposite, a warm heart and a feeling of closeness. And that is, of course, the global antidote to hatred, but it's also the global antidote to a lot of the other more subtle problems, including the problem of loneliness, including the sense of isolation and loneliness. Okay, so what we can do is reset with a bit of meditation just to get started, and then I'll give more explanation on how to cultivate a kind heart in this way. So resetting just by taking a deep breath in and out, so we can find a comfortable position, whatever that is like for you. Take a deep breath in and out, just sending a signal to our body that it is time for us to relax, decompress, find a place of peace. And take another deep breath in and out, and see if we can feel some sense of relaxation in our body. And then another deep breath, and we just ask ourselves, what is important right now? When we ask ourselves what is important right now, sometimes the feeling is almost like sobering up and shaking our head a bit and just thinking, right now, what is important? It may not be whatever it was that we were thinking about previously. Our mind has a tendency to get caught in these eddies of thought, these these little rabbit holes where we think and think and think. So when we take a deep breath in and out, that's happening in the present moment. It gives us a chance to connect, in particular with our body, where we can store a lot of tension and discomfort. We'll feel our body reacting if we're in a conversation with someone we find unpleasant, if we feel threatened, if we feel embarrassed. There are physical sensations that go along with this. So we need to learn how to find a peaceful, relaxed state of body and mind wherever we are. And as we breathe right now, we realize there's no drama going on. Just a quiet space, just simple breathing. All of the drama has passed in our life. We can just settle in and feel peaceful. Even if we forget it, our breathing is continuing. This quiet life force that can remind us of all the things inside our body that are keeping us alive. And we may feel, as we breathe in and out, we may feel small tensions relaxing here and there in our body. We can invite that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. We try to feel what our body feels like from the inside, not thinking about our breath with our head, but actually feeling it with our belly, with our chest, feeling some slight sensation even in our hands and feet. Then we can begin to generate a sense of gratitude by bringing to mind all of the people and other beings, inanimate things, and so forth that have enabled us to get to where we are today. Everything that sustains our life and has sustained us to this point. Our parents, employers, friends, family, and everyone that we depend upon directly and indirectly. Without others, we would not even exist. We could not survive. And with this sense of our interdependence, a feeling of gratitude can arise, and we can generate a good motivation for our session here. We can think through our listening, contemplating, and meditating. May we build our capacity to help, to repay the kindness of others. And then with this motivation, we can relax our concentration and arise from our meditation. So just lingering for a couple of minutes on this point about our rationality versus our emotional aspect. A friend of mine was telling me the story a couple of days ago about Pythagoras. You may remember from grade school the Pythagorean theorem, triangles, and Pythagoras, ancient Greek, great mathematician, philosopher, and one of these legends of Greek thought. And most famous, of course, for the Pythagorean theorem, the relationship between the edges of a triangle. And he was a big believer that so he was a rationalist, like a diehard rationalist, that everything must be rational, like there must be a rational number, that there's no such thing as what you call an irrational number in mathematics. So I'm going deep nerd here for a second, but numbers that every number should be expressible as a fraction, like 1/3 or 1/7 or something like that. All these numbers have this perfect rationality. There's no such thing as a number that goes on forever and can't be expressed as a fraction, which would be called as an irrational number. Now, one of his disciples, one of his students, humbly pointed out, well, Pythagoras, according to your theorem, if you have a triangle with side of length 1 and side of length 1 here, then this length is the length, square root of 2. And square root of 2 is not a rational number. So how do you reconcile, your belief that all numbers are rational with this, with your Pythagorean theorem, which seems to point to a number that's not? And so my friend told me the story as a quiz. His quiz was, what do you think Pythagoras did as a rational person? Apparently, I was told, he sent his student on a ship and drowned him at sea. So he drowned him at sea for questioning his rationality and so forth. So my friend told me the story in the context of, you need to be deferential to authority, and at some point you can't expect people to always act in rational ways. But I think it's a good story about exactly how rational humans are. Like, was that actually a rational decision that he made? Or was that an emotional decision? Was that just him feeling his mathematical credentials were being threatened? I think perhaps that was more of an emotional decision than a rational decision. And so if we think about all the, the fake news and all that, we get all these brilliant people, touting various conspiracy theories and crazy ideas. How can you explain that? Well, our reasoning is always in service of our emotional state, right? Our reasoning is a tool. We use our tool to, we use our brain to remember maps and navigate things and solve challenging problems. We use it in service of finding food, finding a mate, fitting in society, gaining status, all of these very animal, basic emotional things. And so we have physical needs, we have emotional needs, and our rationality is kind of this thin, superficial, cerebral cortex and so forth. And it's a bit of a layering on. Now, some of us may be more rational than others, and we may live our lives in these very careful ways, but on a deep level, humans are just very emotional creatures. We want to fit in. We want to have status. Even people, anyway, we do all kinds of things for status, making money, rising up in our career, making ourselves look, attractive and so forth. We do all these things to try to have status, which partly just means fitting in, right? Like we want to be accepted. We want to be included and so forth, because there's this existential fear, right? What happens if you're cast out of the tribe, of the pack, right? You need to be in the center of the pack and not have your status at risk. And so we deal with this emotional fear all the time, just continuously. It manifests, as wanting to be picked, to be in part of sports teams, wanting to get a job in a company, wanting to have a circle of friends, fitting in with our family. There's all these different aspects. But often the way we respond, one of the deep tendencies that we have as human beings is to feel like all of that is going on outside of us. Like we are this little independent actor and we're trying to navigate this world that's going on outside of us. So the world's happening to us. But we can say on so many levels, on deep levels, that we are creating the world or recreating the world, and the way we see the world helps to create the world. We can, and by changing the way we see the world, we come to live in a different world. And one of the most powerful ways to experience that is to practice this cultivating a kind heart, cultivating a heart of loving kindness. It is possible to dislike anyone. Take the nicest person in the world, right? Who's the nicest person in the world? Mother Teresa? I don't know. So when I was a teenager, we had a Catholic Italian monk live with my family for a while, and he was a student of Mother Teresa's. And he was like, oh, she's mean. She's so mean. She's really, he lived and worked with her for many years. I'm not saying she's actually mean. I'm just saying it's possible to dislike anybody. And just like it's possible to, to appreciate artwork or not appreciate artwork. I remember, because I'm a very uncultured person, the first time I went to travel Europe on my own, I found my way to the Vatican for a tour, and I wandered in this big room, people milling around looking up. I'm like, what? It was the Sistine Chapel. And I'm like, that's the Sistine Chapel. Just like very uncultured, like no appreciation for fine art, right? But our feelings that we have towards other people, are there nice people and not nice people? Are there people that we like being around and people that we don't like being around? Of course, right? We divide the whole world into what you call friends, enemies, and strangers, roughly speaking. Who are your friends? At work, in your neighborhood. Who are your enemies? Sounds a little bit strong, but who are the people you avoid? Who are the people you'd rather not be stuck with in a conversation? And then who are all the strangers? Everybody else is a stranger. And so our mind naturally divides things up like that constantly. And we divide people up like that for one reason. There's only one reason: how they make us feel. If somebody makes you feel good, they're a friend. You like them. You want to spend time with them. Somebody makes you feel bad, they're a enemy. Sounds kind of strong, but they're on that spectrum. Somebody makes you feel really horrible and you never want to see them again ever for the rest of your life, they're an enemy, right? Someone makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, they're on that enemy spectrum someplace. And somebody doesn't give you any particular feeling, you're walking around, you see this person, that person, stranger. That's it. But if you strike up a conversation with a stranger and you realize you've got something in common, all of a sudden they become a friend, and next time you see them, it's like, oh, hey, right? A good feeling. It's all about the feelings that we generate inside. Now, the feelings that we generate inside depend on how we see people. It depends on the way that we perceive people. There are some people who don't like anyone. More or less, they don't like anybody. Maybe always complaining. Don't mean to be complaining about them. But and there's people who kind of like everybody. It's like these, very friendly people. Who was the... I never met a man I didn't like. It was the old Western star. Name will come to me, sorry. So it really depends on our mental attitude. And but the thing is, our mental attitude's changing all the time, right? And one really good way to notice that is with your partner. Like if you have a partner, or you're trapped in the same space together, as your own feeling states go up and down, right, they become more and less pleasant to live with. If you're feeling good, they're just a joy to be around. If you're feeling bad, they are probably one of the reasons for you to feel bad. Like it's just easy to project blame on them, right? And if we're not feeling good, if we're feeling like a lot of pressure for whatever reason, or discomfort or whatever, our mind tries to rationalize the way we feel, right? We layer on some explanation, right? And what happened, they're great. They always respond promptly. They're great. They always have some good ideas. They're great. We come up with some reason why they're great. And not to say the reasons don't have some truth in them. But what happens, I think living with somebody is a good proof point for what actually happens in the mind, because if you're not feeling good, we tend to look for a reason, and often they're a reasonable explanation for why we're not feeling good. Like, I'm not feeling good and you seem to be here. I suspect you're probably involved in my not feeling good. And so you better stop it. So our mind kind of looks for reasons. We try to anchor our feelings in the world around us. And we say, and so we, anyway, so because our mind does that, we tend to blame other people for our not feeling good. And we credit other people for our feeling good. And that's kind of how we end up getting into a relationship in the first place. We meet someone, they make us feel good, and we see them again, they make us feel good, and they do that enough. They're like, great, let's keep this up, let's commit, and we'll be in a relationship and so forth. And then, of course, the real test comes, because it's like, it's really more about, at that point, it's more about that commitment, right, than the reliable, predictable, good feelings that arise. The challenge here is that our default way of responding to the people around us is projecting on them the power to make us feel good, right? They always make us feel good, so I want to keep them around until they don't want to make us, until they don't make us feel good, at which point I want to eject them, right? And so we're attributing our own feelings to the people around us, and the place around us, and so forth, the things that we have. And so our mind does this all the time. But what happens through this is that our feeling state is quite unstable. We have good days, we have bad days, we have people we like, people we don't like. The number one overwhelming benefit of cultivating a kind heart is that it makes you feel good. So if you simply think about, for example, your coworkers or the people you live with, or neighbors, or whoever you're interacting with, you just think about them, just recall them, and just think, I like these people, or they're okay, or they're nice, or I can accept them, or something. You just trigger that, and you will actually have a good feeling. And the good feeling will be a bodily feeling. In fact, you'll have a feeling of relaxation. That feeling where you have been traveling and then you come back home, where you see your family or friends or someone that you feel really comfortable with, and there's like this relaxation. So good to see you. It's actually a physical feeling, right? Our body reacts physically with this good feeling, an inner, like a flood of internal sense of well-being. And you can cultivate that intentionally simply by recalling, for example, gratitude, or even just bringing someone to mind and just feeling kindly disposed towards them. And the benefit of humans, I think I said early on at the beginning of the session tonight, that humans are kind of basic, right? The benefit of being kind of basic as humans is that we can work with ourselves, right? I've been I've had a kind of a humbug attitude towards birthdays and Christmas and so for a long time. I'm like, I don't want to fuss around with, getting stuff or having cards or whatever. So I'm just like, whatever. Then last year, very unexpectedly, a coworker who I had associated with as being like kind of gruff person, they sent me a birthday gift. It was just very sort of surprising, right? And I prided myself for a long time about like not being materialistic and not like wanting gifts. And so, but anyway, they send me a birthday gift, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, they're so nice. Wow, it's just like good feeling. And I'm like, oh, I'm so basic, but it's just very easy to have that good feeling, just some small act of kindness, just recalling that. And that should have been my cue to be more conscientious about calling other people on their birthdays and wishing them happy birthday. I need to develop that habit, because honestly, I was living with this very humbug attitude for too long. So I need to go back and build that. But I'm just saying, it's so easy for our mind to change. If you feel that you're getting some experience of kindness from someone else, your mind, that can trigger our mind to have a kind attitude in response, right? And so, but you can trigger that just by changing your way of thinking. So the meditation we do at the beginning of the session on gratitude, it's just thinking, I would not exist without this person and that person and the other person and my parents and, the people who grow food, the people who harvest the food, the people who transport that food, the people who stock it on the grocery store shelves, the people who've cooked it, for example, restaurants and so forth. There's this incredible, endless series of cause and effect that we depend upon for our survival. And we can interpret that as kindness. Now you could say, well, they didn't mean to feed you particularly; they were just doing their job, and that's true. But from our point of view, it is a kindness, and so just by recollecting the kindness of others, that in fact everything we see, if we look around our physical environment, somebody painted the walls. Maybe someone we know, maybe someone we don't know, someone created the different things, the physical objects that we've surrounded ourselves. There's a story behind everything. The world that we're living in is full of these stories. And the story, if you want to tune in to the story of gratitude, if you want to tune in to the story of kindness and so forth, that story is endless. That story is infinite. There's a saying that that I love very much, that we are all interconnected in a web of kindness from which it is impossible to separate ourselves. We're all interconnected in a web of kindness from which it is impossible to separate ourselves. And that same passage goes on to say that although we tend to think of ourselves as independent, it is closer to the truth to see ourselves as a cell in the vast body of living beings, distinctive yet intimately connected to all of the other cells. Every cell in the body is basically just going on about its own business, just trying to metabolize and do its thing, replicate its DNA and mind its own business and so forth. But of course, that cell lives in an environment, created by the cells around it, and its activities influence the cells around it and so forth. It's not intentional in the way that human beings are, but nevertheless, there's an independence of each cell and an interdependence of each cell in the body. And the same is true for us, right? There's an independence to us, but we're not nearly as independent as we might like to think. And so, not to pick on the poor guy, but our dear president, right? He doesn't seem to have a lot of gratitude for anyone. And as a result, the poor guy is pretty lonely. He has no actual friends because he doesn't actually care about anybody else. And, outwardly, he's got a ton of power, right? But inwardly, he's not a very happy fella. He's lonely. He's afraid. He's isolated. He's bitter. And so it's an amazing example from one point of view. Like, take yourself all the way down that spectrum of like independence. I don't depend on anybody for anything. And, you go all the way down that corridor, and you will end up in a place where you feel utterly isolated, bitter, alone. Everybody else has caused me misery. I don't owe anybody anything. And it's incredibly isolating. It's incredibly painful and so forth. By contrast, feeling that I exist in dependence upon the kindness of others. So everyone, for example, at my company does some job that makes the whole thing work, which eventually ends up in my getting a paycheck, which eventually ends up in my buying food and eating and surviving and all this kind of one way or another, and having something to do and not being bored. Whatever, you can think about whatever is your life circumstance, whatever is the world that you live in, you are surrounded by a vast web of kindness from which it is impossible to extricate yourself. And when you think about that as kindness, not just as like, stuff and people doing their jobs and, but you think about it as kindness, it triggers a response of being kind in return. And that's something we can cultivate. It's an intentional attitude, and all it requires is practice. It's like everything else. It's just a habit that can either become. It's just a habit. There's a traditional, just a final point. The traditional analogy So I'd mentioned previously this book, Atomic Habits, which I still need to read in its entirety. But just about habits are laid down one atom at a time. But the traditional analogy for this is that in the forest, a little mouse runs through the forest, right, and pushes down a blade of grass as it runs through the forest. And then behind it, a fox or something travels and pushes down a bunch of blades of grass. And then behind that, there's a bit of a parting in the grass. And so a deer walks through that and creates more of a parting in the grass. And then other deer follow and make more of a parting. And then a human comes walking through the woods and sees that parted area and walks on it and, treads it down. And then more humans come and they tread it down. And eventually somebody puts gravel on there. Eventually they make it into a road. Eventually they make it into, in the old days, it would just be like a cart with like these ruts, these wagon wheels and so forth. These days it's super highways and so forth. But that's the way paths get laid down. So paths in the forest get laid down like that. Paths in our mind get laid down the same way. So when we repeat a pattern, when we put energy into something, that habit becomes deeper, stronger, more stable, more instinctive. And so you get to the point where even when somebody is an utter jerk to you, you think, this person's so kind. They're showing me how much more patience I need to develop. They're showing me, right? They're showing me humility. They're showing me that, I don't, they're teaching me something. So, and so there's a whole spectrum, there's a whole rich tradition of practices that lead in this direction. But again, the first and deepest benefit from training and cultivating a kind heart is it makes us feel better. And from there's so many other benefits. Makes other people favorably disposed towards us, helps us to build a peaceful, more stable mind that's easier to meditate with, and the benefits go on and on and on. But something we can intentionally do, just especially thinking about the people that we deal with on a regular basis, training in that mind, trying to wake up. If you wake up, I said it was going to be the last point a minute ago, but this is actually the last point. If you wake up in the morning and you're a little bit like this morning, I woke up, I was a bit sleep deprived. I was a bit like, I don't want to get out of bed, and feeling a little bit grumpy and so forth. I just thought about my coworkers, the people I, on my team, and we hired somebody new. And so I just thought about them and just concentrated on them. I just thought, these are lovely people, these kind people. I need to help them. I need to be good to them and so forth. It's actually a training in the mind. And then I woke up feeling much better. And then I was probably nicer to them than I would have been otherwise. So we can take a few minutes just to let this settle in, contemplate these points in meditation. So we reset with a deep breath in and out. In general, we don't control our breathing, but in the beginning, we can take a couple of breaths just to build, just to prime the pump of our breathing. We can return to that sense of gratitude. We can think about all of the people involved in bringing us to the place where we are today. We have worked hard throughout our life, but who taught and inspired us to work hard? Who gave us the skills, helped us to build the skills? Who gives us an opportunity to work hard? Who do we work for? Who do we benefit? we try to stimulate a feeling of gratitude in our heart. And we can feel warmly disposed towards everyone who has shown us kindness, and even those who we may not realize have been kind to us, have inevitably been kind in some way, directly or indirectly, now or in the past. By intentionally generating a mind of gratitude towards others, we are cultivating a kind heart. We can try to feel, how does this feel inside our body? What is that feeling? And then we can think, even through this very brief time together, we've been building these mental habits of gratitude, building our inner peace, listening, contemplating carefully. These habits are inner pathways that strengthen what can become highways in our mind. So we think through this activity of meditating together. May this move us in the direction of really being able to repay the kindness of others through building our own good qualities, our own peace, wisdom. And then we can relax our concentration and open our eyes.